Welcome back to Hearts and Wisdom Creators, LLC. Today, we continue the haunting journey of Minato, our young protagonist, as he navigates life near Mount Fuji following the tragic loss of his parents in a car accident.
Minato returned to the attic space again that afternoon, drawn by a quiet urgency he didn't quite understand. The air was still and musty, filled with the faint scent of old paper and cedar wood. He knelt on the tatami floor beneath the low, sloped ceiling and began sifting through the forgotten remnants of his uncle's past. More journals, sketchbooks, and faded photographs tucked away in dusty boxes. Each page he turned deepened the mystery. There were detailed notes about the forest, strange symbols, dreams recorded in fragments, and crude sketches that mirrored his own unsettling visions. One drawing in particular, a shadowy figure standing at the edge of the tree line, made Minato's breath catch. He had seen that very shape from his bedroom window. In an old photograph, he saw his uncle as a teenager, solemn-eyed and lanky, standing in front of the same house, the black forest visible in the distance behind him. There was something familiar in his expression, a quiet sorrow, a knowing gaze. Minato paused, a knot forming in his stomach. Why had no one spoken of him? Why had his uncle disappeared from the family's life so completely? He had to know. But as the silence of the attic wrapped around him, that sense of connection turned to loneliness. A weight settled over his chest. Carefully, he closed the journal and crawled back through the small door into his bedroom. There, he lay down on his futon and cried softly into his pillow, the ache for his mother and father pressing into his ribs like stones. Over the next few days, Minato's grandparents watched him closely, checking his temperature, making sure he ate, sitting near him in the evenings while pretending to read or knit. He could see the worry etched in their expressions. They were gentle with him, never prying but always near. Then came the day of the psychological assessment. Minato carried his uncle's first journal with him, clutching it tightly as a kind of anchor. The clinic was quiet, and the counselor's office smelled faintly of green tea and antiseptic. The assessment lasted about 45 minutes. The therapist, kind-eyed and soft-spoken, asked Minato questions about his thoughts, feelings, and memories. He answered as best he could, though some words still felt too heavy to say out loud. As the session came to a close, the therapist noticed the weathered journal Minato had been holding the entire time. "That looks old," she said gently. "Is it yours?" Minato hesitated, then shook his head. "It was my uncle's. He used to live in the room I stay in now. I found it in the attic." The therapist nodded thoughtfully. "Would you mind if I took a quick look?" she asked. Minato hesitated again, then opened the journal to one of the pages covered in strange symbols and a drawing of the forest. The therapist leaned in, her expression shifting subtly. She didn't say much at first, only asked how Minato felt when he read the entries. "Like I'm not alone," he said quietly. "Like he went through something too. Something with the forest." She nodded again, writing something down on her notepad. "That's important, Minato," she said. "We'll talk more about it next time. But for now I want you to keep writing too. Draw if you want, like your uncle did. Let's try to understand what's going on together, okay?" Minato nodded. For the first time in weeks he felt like maybe, just maybe, someone might believe him. But deep inside he also knew something else. The answers he needed wouldn't come from therapy alone. They were in the forest. And the forest was still calling. After the session, Minato returned home with his grandfather. The house felt quieter than usual but comforting in its own way. His grandmother greeted them with a gentle smile and offered a warm snack, sweet rice crackers and tea. Minato ate slowly, the flavors grounding him. Once finished, he thanked them softly and headed upstairs. Drawn by curiosity and a strange sense of connection, Minato slipped once more into the small, hidden art room beneath the eaves, the space that had once belonged to his uncle. The air was thick with the scent of old paper, ink, and time. He carefully examined more of his uncle's artwork, haunting, intricate images of the forest. Some were surreal, others too vivid to be imagination. As he flipped through a stack of charcoal sketches, a faint whisper drifted through the room. "Minato," the voice whispered. He froze. The voice was soft, like breath against the ear, but it came from nowhere. His eyes darted around the room, but he was alone. Shaken but curious, he picked up one drawing, a shadowed path leading deep into the forest, almost alive with movement. Holding the piece, he walked to the window and peered out toward the woods. A flicker of motion between the trees. Minato's heart quickened. He carefully slid the drawing into his backpack, zipped it closed, and headed downstairs. Standing in the doorway to the living room, he asked, "Obasan Ojaizen, is it okay if I go outside for a little while?" His grandfather looked up from his newspaper. "Just stay close to the house," Grandpa said. Minato nodded, his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Thank you," he said. With that, he stepped out the door, toward the tree line, and the unknown beyond. Minato made his way toward the chicken coop, retracing the steps he had taken with his grandfather days earlier. He was searching for the strange footprint he had discovered while collecting eggs. The morning's light rain and breeze had nearly erased it, but after brushing aside some grass, Minato spotted the faint outline. It looked longer than he remembered. A chill crept up his spine. What kind of creature left this? Out of the corner of his eye, he noticed another print, this one leading toward the side of the house, directly beneath the eave of the old attic art room. Curiosity stirred. He followed the trail. As he walked, something shimmered in the woods beyond the property line, a brief, glinting light. It flickered between the trees, catching his attention like a signal. But then his grandparents' warning echoed in his mind. "Stay away from the forest's edge. Dangerous. People go in, and many don't come out." Minato stopped, torn between fear and fascination. Then he noticed that the trail of footprints ended directly beneath the eave of the art room. Looking up at the small window, then turning to face the tree line, a realization hit him. This must have been where his uncle was sitting when he drew that forest sketch. He opened his backpack, pulled out the artwork, and held it up, scanning the trees. His eyes landed on a specific patch of forest. Matched. Suddenly, a whisper floated down from above. "Minato." He spun around, heart racing, but no one was there. He turned again, scanning every direction. Nothing. Then came a second whisper, sharper, more urgent, and different from the one he'd heard in the art room. "Minato, don't." The whisper didn't come from one place. It surrounded him, echoing softly from the trees, the wind, the shadows. "Don't go in." Minato froze, the words clinging to his skin like cold mist. His voice trembled as he looked around and called out, "Who are you?" Silence answered him. No one was there. His eyes drifted back toward the edge of the forest. The glimmering light flickered again, faint, almost playful, like it was trying to lure him in. "What is that?" he wondered, his heart beating faster. Despite the warning, something stirred in him, a burning, restless curiosity. It clawed its way up from the pit of his stomach, whispering louder than the forest ever could. He took a hesitant step forward. Then another. "Minato," the voice returned, more urgent now, more desperate. "Don't go." But it was too late. The pull was stronger than fear, stronger than reason. He had to know. He walked closer to the tree line, eyes fixed on where the light had danced, and just as his foot met a patch of slick earth, he stumbled. His body pitched forward, and he hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from his lungs. Dazed, Minato lay still for a moment, listening to the wind rustle through the grass, the soft hush of leaves from the forest. Somewhere deep inside, grief and wonder collided, and he whispered back to no one in particular. "Why me?" he asked himself softly. "Minato. Minato." His grandparents' voices rang out in the distance, urgent and filled with worry. Startled, Minato sat up quickly, wincing as a sharp sting flared in his leg. He glanced down and saw a thin, bleeding cut just above his shin, most likely from one of the jagged meadow rocks hidden beneath the tall grass. As he shifted to stand, something small and oddly familiar caught his eye among the blades of green. Half buried in the earth was an old toy, weathered, worn, and out of place. He picked it up gently, turning it over in his hand before slipping it quietly into his shorts pocket. "I'm over here," he called out, standing to wave. His grandfather was already on his way, moving briskly across the field with concern etched across his face. "Are you all right, boy?" he asked, eyes scanning Minato quickly. "I saw you fall from the window and you didn't get up," Grandpa said sternly. Minato nodded, trying to brush it off. "Just a cut. I'm okay." But his grandfather crouched beside him anyway, inspecting the wound. His brow furrowed deeply. "It's not too bad, but it needs to be cleaned," he muttered, then added with a gentle firmness. "We told you to stay away from the tree line. That forest is no place for wandering." Minato lowered his eyes, guilt prickling at him as he followed his grandfather back toward the house. His grandmother met them at the porch, eyes widening as she saw the blood on his leg. Without a word, she hurried inside and returned with antiseptic, clean cloths, and a look that spoke of both relief and frustration. As she cleaned the cut, Minato looked up at his grandfather. "I didn't mean to go that far," he said softly. "But I saw someone maybe moving in the trees. I just wanted a better look." His grandparents exchanged a quick, uneasy glance but said nothing. The wind stirred again from the forest behind them, and in Minato's pocket, the small toy felt heavier somehow, like it remembered more than it should. Minato sat quietly as his grandmother gently cleaned and bandaged the cut on his leg. The antiseptic stung, but he didn't flinch. His mind was elsewhere, still lingering at the edge of the forest, on the whisper in the air, and the strange object he'd tucked into his pocket. Once the bleeding stopped, he looked up at his grandparents, his voice soft. "I'm sorry for worrying you both." His grandfather gave a small nod, the sternness in his face softening. "Just rest now," his grandmother said, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Minato stood and limped upstairs to his room. The late afternoon light filtered through the paper shoji screen, casting a quiet warmth on the tatami floor. He lowered himself onto his futon and exhaled deeply, exhaustion catching up with him. Then he remembered the toy. He reached into his pocket and pulled it out, a small metal action figure no taller than his thumb. Its paint was chipped, and one of its legs was slightly bent, but the figure still stood rigid like a tiny, worn soldier. Minato turned it over in his hand slowly, studying the details. A scratched helmet, a faint insignia on its chest. Something about it felt familiar, achingly familiar. As his fingers brushed across the cold metal, a wave of sleepiness washed over him. His eyes grew heavy, and then, from somewhere far away, he heard a voice. "Minato, come here, son." His mother's voice. In the dream, they were in a quaint little shop back in Shimoda, tucked between a noodle stall and a bakery. The air smelled of soy and sea salt. His mother smiled at him as she picked something up from a shelf. "I'm going to get this for you. Do you like it?" She knelt down and placed the very same action figure into his small, eager hands. Minato's face lit up with joy. He dropped to the wooden floor and began to play, pretending to be a fearless warrior chasing monsters through imaginary forests. His mother laughed softly, brushing his hair aside and watching him with such love in her eyes. The warmth of that moment clung to him like sunlight. But just as quickly as it came, the dream unraveled. Her laughter faded. The scent of the sea was gone. And Minato awoke to the quiet rustle of wind through the trees outside his window. The toy was still clutched in his hand. Tears stung his eyes as the weight of the memory settled on his chest. That toy had been a gift. One of his last, perhaps. Somehow, it had found its way back to him. But how? And more importantly, why was it there, just outside the forest? Driven by a gnawing need to understand, Minato sat up, wiping his face. He had to know where the toy came from. Who had placed it there? Was it just coincidence or something more? He slipped the figure gently into a small cloth pouch, tied it with string, and tucked it safely into his satchel. Then, he glanced toward the small door that led to his uncle's art room. Maybe the next journal held answers. The wind outside had died down, but a strange heaviness lingered in the air as Minato crept back into the attic. The floors groaned beneath his feet, and a musty chill clung to the shadows. It felt colder this time, as if the room had been waiting for him. He stepped into his uncle's hidden art space, tucked beneath the slanted eaves. Dust motes floated through the slivers of late afternoon light, dancing like restless spirits above the wooden floorboards. Everything looked the same as before, but there was an unsettled energy, like the room was holding its breath. Minato walked toward the old trunk of journals and gently pulled one open. Flipping through its brittle pages, he found sketches of trees twisting into unnatural shapes, and strange symbols scrawled into the margins. But then a familiar entry caught his attention. "Father gave us the soldier set when we were young, my brother and I. I chose the tall warrior with the chipped foot. Something about him felt safe. I once took him into the woods. After that day, I could hear things, whispering, calling. I never told anyone. I still see him in my dreams, still holding the soldier." Minato's heart thudded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the toy, the same soldier from the journal, the same one he had found near the forest line. Holding it now, it felt heavier, as though soaked with memory. Driven by a gnawing sense of curiosity, he turned toward a large, dust-covered wooden toy chest in the corner. It sat tucked beneath a shelf of dried brushes and forgotten paints. Minato slowly lifted the creaking lid. Inside were rows of old toy soldiers' uniforms, faded, some broken, their small painted eyes dulled by time. They were arranged in neat rows, like a forgotten army waiting for a command. But none looked quite like the figure in his hand. This one had been set apart, cherished, or feared. Just as he reached to examine the others, a sharp creak echoed above him. Minato froze. He looked up toward the wooden beams in the ceiling, heart pounding. Another sound followed, a soft shuffling, almost like footsteps dragging slowly across the attic floor. But he was alone, wasn't he? He held still, barely breathing. Then came a faint scratching, not loud but distinct. It was coming from behind the far wall, near the shelves of old paintings and stacked canvases. The scratching stopped. Silence fell. Minato's breath fogged slightly in the air. The attic felt colder than before. Creak. Another noise. This one closer. Gripping the toy soldier and an old journal tightly, Minato stepped back from the chest, scanning the room with wide eyes. He backed toward the narrow doorway, heart racing. But just as he reached the opening, the soldier in his hand seemed to warm slightly, almost pulsing. Minato looked down at it, confusion flickering across his face. "Why now?" he asked himself quietly. He didn't know what was waiting in the shadows of the attic, or in the woods beyond the house. But something had started, something that didn't want to stay buried. The wind had quieted outside, but Minato's thoughts churned louder than ever. Clutching the journal and the soldier, Minato quietly made his way downstairs. The smell of warm tea and pickled vegetables filled the air. His grandparents sat at the kitchen table, the soft murmurs of the TV playing in the background. Minato hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward, holding the small figure in his palm. "Obachan, Ojaizen," he began softly. "Can I ask you something?" His grandfather turned first, eyebrows lifting slightly. "Do you remember this toy?" He held out the soldier. "Oz." His grandmother leaned forward, adjusting her glasses. A wistful expression crossed her face. "Oh, I haven't seen that in years," she said, a note of surprise in her voice. His grandfather's face darkened with recognition. "That was part of the set I gave your father and uncle when they were boys. Your uncle always carried that one around. Said it was his protector." Minato's voice trembled slightly. "Did something happen with uncle?" When he went into the forest, the table fell silent. Only the clock ticked. His grandfather finally spoke, voice heavy. Your uncle was never quite the same after that day. He wandered too far into the woods once when he was about your age. We found him the next morning, curled under an old cedar tree, clutching that soldier. He wouldn't speak for days, said grandfather. His grandmother placed a hand gently on Minato's. He stopped playing with the others, kept that one figure by his bed for years. Then he left. And we haven't heard from him since, Grandma said softly. Minato stared at the toy, heart pounding. What had happened in those woods? Minato thought to himself.
If you enjoyed part 2 of Minato's haunting adventure, be sure to stay tuned for more of his unfolding story. Thanks again for joining us here at Hearts and Wisdom Creators, LLC. Until next time, bye for now.